Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? This time, we're strapping in and taking to the skies with the P-51 Mustang. Seriously, this thing's legendary, and you guys sent over some pretty fascinating material on it. Clearly, you're all as captivated by this bird as I am, so
Yeah.
let's unpack what makes the Mustang so iconic. We're talking beyond the basics here. We're going for a deep dive. The crazy, fast design process, that engine swap that turned it into a whole new beast, the Tuskegee Airmen and their connection to this plane, even the surprising material they used for the drop tanks. Buckle up, because this is going to be a wild ride.
You're not kidding about wild. Even for seasoned aviation buffs, your sources bring up some really thought-provoking stuff.
That's what I love about these deep dives. Always something new to learn. But first, let's set the stage a bit. 117 days. That's all it took North American Aviation to go from the drawing board to the P-51's first flight. 117 days. You know, in your notes, you highlighted how car production back then, we're talking the 1940s, took months and months. This 117-day thing, it really puts that into perspective, doesn't it?
Mind-boggling, isn't it? They were under immense pressure from the British, who'd actually ordered the plane. But there was a snag early on, the Allison engine they initially used. Decent, but it struggled at higher altitudes.
Yeah, one of the pilot accounts you sent over described it as, like, the engine was running out of breath. Not exactly what you want when you're trying to chase down enemy fighters.
Not ideal at all. So they swapped it out for the Rolls-Royce Merlin, a British-designed engine. And that was a game changer. Not just because it was more powerful, but how that supercharger worked. It meant the P-51 could finally perform at high altitudes. And crucially, it had the range to escort bombers deep into enemy territory.
Okay, let's talk about those specs for a second. Top speed of 437 miles per hour and a range of, what, about 1,650 miles with drop tanks? Those are some serious numbers. I mean, that's like flying from New York to Denver without stopping.
Exactly. And with that range, bombers could hit targets deep in Germany, targets that were previously untouchable. Previous escort fighters just couldn't keep up for that long. It was a complete strategic shift in how the air war could be fought.
Speaking of those drop tanks, you mentioned earlier that they were made of paper? That seems a little, I don't know, kind of crazy.
It sounds odd, but it was actually a brilliant solution. Born out of necessity, really. Metal was in short supply. And those tanks were designed to be jettisoned anyway, right?
Right.
One of your sources actually argues that the laminated paper was even more effective than metal in certain ways. It didn't shatter on impact, so it reduced the risk of shrapnel.
That's incredible. So this seemingly simple material choice actually reflects a whole lot about wartime production and ingenuity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It shows how the P-51's design wasn't just about brute force, but clever solutions. Solutions tailored to the challenges of the time. And that brings us to another fascinating design element, the oil cooler.
Yes, I remember this from one of the diagrams you included. It's that scoop-shaped radiator under the fuselage, right?
That's the one. Now, most people would assume it's just there to keep the engine cool, which it does. But the placement was so ingenious that it actually created a small amount of thrust, making the plane even more efficient.
Wait, the radiator actually helped the plane fly faster? I never would guess that.
It's a testament to the designer's attention to detail. They didn't just slap on a radiator, they integrated it into the plane's aerodynamics. This philosophy of squeezing every bit of performance out of the design is something you see throughout the P-51.
So let's talk about how this technological marvel actually performed in combat. It's time to dive into the P-51's role in World War II.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Before the P-51, Allied bomber crews faced terrifying odds. German fighters would pick them off as they flew deeper into enemy territory. In your research, you highlighted a statistic about the early bombing campaigns the losses were. Well, they were staggering, weren't they?
Yeah, it was unsustainable. But with the P-51's long-range and high-altitude performance, suddenly those bombers had a true guardian angel. They could escort the bombers all the way to the target and back, drastically reducing losses.
It was a complete shift in the balance of power in the air. The P-51 allowed the Allies to maintain a constant offensive, hammering strategic targets deep within Germany. It played a vital role in crippling the German war machine.
But the P-51 wasn't the first fighter the USAF relied on, was it? They were using the P-40 Warhawk earlier in the war, right?
Exactly. You specifically mentioned the Flying Tigers in your notes. They flew the P-40 with some success in China. It was a tough, reliable plane, especially good at lower altitudes.
So what was the problem with it? Why the need for a new fighter?
The P-40 had its limitations. It simply couldn't compete at the higher altitudes where the strategic bombing campaign was taking place, and its range was nowhere near what was needed for long escort missions.
One of your articles described a P-40 pilot watching helplessly as a bomber formation he was supposed to be protecting got jumped by German fighters. He simply couldn't get to them in time.
That highlights the problem perfectly. The need for a better fighter became glaringly obvious, and the P-51 answered that call.
And it didn't just slightly improve on the P-40, did it? It outclassed it in almost every way. Speed, range, maneuverability, you name it.
It really was a leap forward in technology. But it's important to remember that technology is only part of the story. It's the people behind it who truly make the difference. And speaking of remarkable people, we can't talk about the P-51 without mentioning the Tuskegee Airmen.
Absolutely. You actually have quite a bit of material on them, and I'm excited to dig into it. This is a story that goes beyond just flying planes. It's about breaking down barriers and challenging deeply ingrained prejudice.
The Tuskegee Airmen were the first African-American military aviators in the U.S. Army Air Corps. Their story is one of incredible courage, skill, and perseverance in the face of immense adversity. They faced segregation and discrimination at every turn, yet they emerged as some of the most highly respected pilots of the war.
I'm particularly struck by something you highlighted in your notes. Despite facing constant prejudice, the Tuskegee Airmen were determined to prove themselves not just as pilots, but as equals. And they did so in spectacular fashion.
They earned a reputation for exceptional skill and bravery, flying those P-51s, often adorned with their signature red tails, with distinction.
Those red tails became legendary, right? In one of your sources, a bomber pilot describes seeing those red tails coming to their rescue as the most welcome sight imaginable.
The record speaks for itself. Not a single bomber under their protection was ever lost to enemy fighters. It's a testament to their incredible skill and dedication.
It's an inspiring story, and a powerful reminder that the P-51's legacy is about much more than just nuts and bolts and aerodynamics. It's about the people who flew it, the sacrifices they made, and the barriers they broke down. But the Mustang story doesn't end with World War II, does it?
No, it doesn't. The P-51 continued to serve, even as the jet age dawned. But before we get into that, let's pause here and reflect on what we've learned about this incredible aircraft so far. The P-51 Mustang truly is a remarkable machine, born out of necessity and forged in the fires of war. But, as you so thoughtfully pointed out in your research, its story is deeply intertwined with the human stories of those who designed it, built it, and most importantly, flew it.
Yeah, this is already more than just a history lesson for me. It's feeling more like a window into a whole era, you know. But I'm dying to hear what happened to the Mustang after the war. We'll pick up there in part 2.
All right, we're back and ready to pick up where we left off. The P-51 Mustang, a World War II hero. But what happened to it after the war ended? Did it just become a museum piece? Not at all, not at all. It's true that the jet age was dawning. Those sleek new fighters were starting to, steal the spotlight. But the Mustang wasn't ready to be relegated to the history books just yet.
You actually included an article about the Korean War. And I was surprised to see the P-51 playing a role there, but it wasn't exactly the same role as in World War II, was it?
You picked up on that. Good catch. By that point, jets like the F-86 Sabre were dominating air-to-air combat. The P-51, with its piston engine, just couldn't really keep up in those dogfights anymore.
Yeah, one of the pilot accounts you shared described it as trying to race a sports car with a family sedan.
Apt comparison. But the Mustang still had plenty to offer. Its versatility and ruggedness made it ideal for ground attack missions. It could loiter over battlefields for extended periods, providing close air support to troops on the ground.
So it was like a trusty old workhorse, still pulling its weight even though the flashy new models were getting all the attention.
Exactly. And that adaptability is part of what makes the P-51 so fascinating. It wasn't just a one-trick pony, It could excel in different roles, evolving to meet the changing demands of warfare.
Okay, so the Mustang served in Korea, but eventually even its ground attack days had to come to an end, right?
Eventually, yes. As jet technology advanced, even in ground attack roles, the P-51 was outmatched. But that's where the story takes another interesting turn.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What happened next?
This is where the Mustang story transcends purely military history and enters the realm of, legend. Even though its combat days were over, its popularity only seemed to grow.
That's interesting. It's almost like it became more appreciated once it wasn't a weapon anymore,
I think there's something to that. Stripped of its wartime role, the P-51 could be admired for its beauty, its performance, its historical significance. It became a symbol of a bygone era, a time of daring pilots and epic air battles.
It's also got that classic, almost romantic look, doesn't it? Those sleek lines, the powerful engine, that sense of raw speed and agility. It captures the imagination.
Absolutely. And that visual appeal translated perfectly to popular culture. You see the P-51 popping up everywhere in movies, TV shows, video games, you name it.
Oh, yeah. It's like the go-to plane for any scene that needs a dose of old school cool. One of the books you included actually talks about how Hollywood helps cement the P-51's image as the ultimate fighter plane.
That's a great point. Films like Saving Private Ryan and countless others have used the P-51 to evoke a sense of nostalgia, heroism, and adventure.
I think that's part of the reason it continues to fascinate people today. It's not just a cold, lifeless machine. It's wrapped up in all these stories, these emotions, these images from our collective memory.
That's a great way to put it. The P-51 has become a cultural touchstone, a symbol of a specific time and place in history. It represents something that we perhaps long for, a simpler time, a time of courage and sacrifice, a time when good triumphed over evil.
It's almost like looking at a P-51 is like looking back through time, You can almost imagine those World War II pilots soaring through the skies, fighting for freedom.
It's a powerful connection to the past. And speaking of connecting to the past, it's really amazing. The P-51 isn't just a museum piece. There's still many of them flying today.
Wait, really? I mean, I know they're in museums, but you're saying people are actually flying them.
Yes, many P-51s have been lovingly restored to their former glory and are flown regularly at air shows and private events.
I've seen videos of those air shows. Seeing a P-51 in flight, hearing the roar of that Merlin engine, it must be an incredible experience.
It's truly breathtaking. It's a testament to the craftsmanship and engineering of those who built these planes, that they can still soar through the skies after all these years.
One of your sources mentioned a group of mechanics who specialize in restoring T-51s. They describe it as more than just a job. It's a passion, a way of honoring the legacy of these aircraft.
And it's thanks to those dedicated individuals that future generations will be able to experience the thrill of seeing a P-51 in action. It's a living, breathing connection to history.
It's amazing to think that a plane designed and built in the midst of war could have such a lasting impact. Not just on military history, but on popular culture and even our own imaginations. But I am curious, what's specifically about the P-51 do you think is most remarkable? What really grabs your attention?
That's a tough question because there are so many aspects to admire. But if I had to pick one, I'd say it's the P-51's embodiment of human ingenuity and determination.
You're talking about the whole 117-day design and production thing, right? I mean, that alone is incredible. But it seems like there's more to it than just speed.
Absolutely. It's about how the P-51 was constantly being refined, improved, adapted. The switch to the Merlin engine is the obvious example. But even throughout the war, there were constant tweaks and modifications to make it even better.
It's like they were never satisfied, always striving for perfection. One of your sources even mentioned how pilots would sometimes modify their planes themselves, trying to get that extra edge in combat.
That's right. It speaks to this constant drive to push the boundaries, to innovate, to find that winning formula. And that spirit of innovation is something that we can still learn from today.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always about making giant leaps. Sometimes it's about those incremental improvements, those small tweaks that, over time, add up to something truly remarkable.
And it's about having the courage to experiment, to try new things, to break free from conventional thinking. The P-51 is a testament to what's possible when we embrace that mindset.
Well said. Well, we've covered so much ground already, from wartime exploits to Hollywood stardom and even the P-51's continued presence in the skies today. It really is a story that just keeps unfolding, isn't it?
Indeed. It's a story that speaks to the enduring power of human ingenuity, courage, and the desire to reach for the skies.
And on that note, I think it's time for us to land this part of our deep dive. But don't go anywhere just yet, because in part 3, we're going to explore what the P-51 Mustang means for us today, in the 21st century. What's its legacy, and why should we still care about a plane that's over 75 years old? Stay tuned.
And we're back for the final part of our P-51 deep dive. It's amazing how this one plane has taken us from, wartime Europe to Hollywood and even present-day air shows.
It really speaks to its enduring appeal. But now for the big question, what does the P-51 mean to us today? In a world so different from the one it was born into.
Right, because it's easy to get caught up in the nostalgia, the cool factor.
Yeah.
But you've got some thought-provoking stuff in your research about the Mustang's relevance now in the 21st century.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me while reading through your material was how the P-51 embodies a kind of problem-solving mindset, a mindset that we could really use more of these days. Think about it. They needed a better fighter, and fast. No endless committees, no bureaucratic red tape, just Pure, focused ingenuity. You know, one of your sources actually contrasts this with modern military procurement, where it can take decades to get a new plane off the ground. The 117-day thing seems almost miraculous by comparison.
It really does. It highlights a certain agility, a willingness to take risks, to push boundaries that, while perhaps driven by wartime necessity, is still inspiring. It begs the question, what could we achieve today if we approach challenges with that same sense of urgency and focus?
It's a good question to ponder, especially in a world that often feels bogged down in complexity. But the P-51's legacy isn't just about rapid development, is it? You've also got some stuff in here about its design philosophy itself, offering valuable lessons.
Oh, absolutely. Remember that oil cooler we talked about?
Uh,
Not just cooling the engine, but actually contributing to thrust. That's not just a clever engineering trick. It reflects a whole approach to design where every element has to pull its weight, work in harmony with the whole.
It's like that saying, form follows function, but taken to an extreme level. In one of the engineering reports you shared, there's a whole section on how the Mustang's wing design minimized drag while maximizing lift. It's seriously impressive stuff.
It really is. And this focus on efficiency, on getting the most out of every ounce of material, every drop of fuel, feels remarkably relevant today, don't you think? In a world grappling with climate change and resource scarcity, these are lessons worth revisiting.
It's like the P-51 was ahead of its time in a way, forced by wartime constraints to be incredibly resourceful. It makes you wonder what those designers could have come up with if they had access to modern materials and technology.
It's a tantalizing thought. But even beyond the technical aspects, the P-51's story offers some timeless insights about the human spirit. We talked about the Tuskegee Airmen, their incredible courage in the face of discrimination.
You know, what really struck me about your research on them wasn't just their achievements, but how they used their platform to fight for equality even after the war. It wasn't just about being great pilots. It was about using their success to challenge the status quo.
Exactly. And that makes their connection to the P-51 even more powerful. It's a symbol not just of military might, but of the human capacity to overcome adversity and to fight for what's right. In a world that still struggles with injustice, that message feels as relevant as ever.
It's a reminder that progress takes more than just technological innovation. It takes courage, perseverance, and a willingness to challenge the way things are. And the P-51, in its own way, embodies all of those things.
Yeah, and perhaps that's why it continues to capture our imaginations, even decades after its heyday. It's a reminder that the human spirit, much like a well-designed aircraft, can soar to incredible heights when given the chance.
Beautifully put. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this feeling of, well, hope, I guess. The P-51 is more than just a cool plane. It's a symbol of what we're capable of, both in terms of ingenuity and in terms of striving for a better world.
I think that's a great takeaway. The P-51's legacy isn't just about remembering the past, it's about using the lessons of the past to inspire us in the present and to shape a better future.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for guiding me through all this. It's been an amazing journey. And to you, dear listener, I hope this deep dive has given you some new perspectives on this iconic aircraft. Maybe even inspired you to look a little closer at the machines and the people that have shaped our world. Until next time, keep exploring.